Hamatakwape, Betu Ashte. Hello, my relatives. Today is a good day. I'm going to read you something that my Lekshi, actually is my grandfather, but he always called me nephew, Matthew King. In English, his Lakota name is Noble Red Man. Something like my son, his Diné name, Nataninez, means tall, dignified statesman. At any rate, my uncle, who's really my grandfather, Matthew King, he died when he was in his 90s, back in 1990, and been born in the 1800s. And this is in his book, Noble Red Man, written by a Catholic priest. This is what he says. He says we're warlike when we're peaceful. He calls us savages, but he's the savage. See, he calls this headdress a war bonnet. Sure, we used it in battle, but most of the time it was for ceremony, not battle. Each feather stands for a good deed. It's not about war. It's about who we are, those headdresses. When we sing songs, he calls them war songs. But they're not war songs. They're prayers to God. We have drums, so he calls them war drums. But they're not for war. They're for talking to God. There's no such thing as a war drum. He sees our men paint their faces, so he calls it war paint. But it's not for war. It's to make it so God can see our faces clearly if we have to die. So how can we talk to them of peace when they only know war? Matthew King, Noble Red Man. It's here on my wall. It used to be on my desk. Just to remind me every day of who I am. The fact that the United States of America has been at war in every year since its existence, and if you don't believe it, read the documented fact. It's a book called On the Justice of Roosting Chickens, by my brother, friend, confidant, and my role model, Ward Churchill, wrote the book On the Justice of Roosting Chickens. A famous saying in a speech made by Malcolm X. On the Justice of Roosting Chickens. Documented fact. The United States of America has been at war every year of its existence. Not just the past 9, every year of its existence. It's embarrassing. You know, if the world knew, if Americans, if you knew that. You know? Wow. A few weeks ago, I went to a meeting of Indigenous scholars held in Adelaide, Australia. So my wife and I, Pearl, we went to that scholarly exercise. And the scholars there presented papers. And some of them shortened their papers. But my first experience at a scholarly treatise. It was about the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Rights. You know, my younger brother, Professor Glenn Morris Esquire, he gave a paper on the tortured route of the passage of the rights of indigenous people. I'm sorry. You go to the United Nations, you get what you deserve. But see, I was there at the beginning, 1977, when we took a bunch of elders, some of them in their traditional dress that they wear every day on the reservation. Others, like me, young lions who were in our American Indian movement, get up. Long hair, headbands, braided hair, chokers, jeans, vests, Indian power buttons, that kind of dress. We were there. And so were some Indian people from Canada, Mexico, Central America, Panama, Costa Rica, from South America, from Colombia, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Chile. The Dutch, they used to be called the Dutch West Indies, and I forget what they're called now. Suriname. And Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay. No, there's no one from Uruguay, just Paraguay. Uruguay said they had no Indians. Anyway, we went to the United Nations in our traditional gear and with our continuing, this was the name of it, 1974. That was 77 when we went there. It took us almost 3 years to organize. It took us 3 years to organize that international meeting, the first international meeting of indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And I got to be on the ground floor of that. Our organization, the International Treaty Council, was co-sponsored along with the UN and other organizations. We worked with the Six Nations people also, the Iroquois Confederacy. But we went there as a challenge to the UN. We didn't go there asking for anything. We went there to challenge them because at our 1974 first International Treaty Council meeting, there we drafted the continuing Declaration of Independence. The continuing Declaration of Independence by us, the American Indians of the Western Hemisphere. 96 or 95 Indian nations were present at that confab, and that's what we came up with, and that's what we went to the UN and presented. Our Declaration of Continuing Independence. We didn't ask for anything. It's the only time in the history of the United Nations, in Geneva, as they said, that they allowed a demonstration. We went in there with our drums and our prayer sticks and our eagle feathers, our staffs of eagle feathers. And we went in there and took it over. And we laid it down to them, a Declaration of Continuing Independence. Said, here it is. Deal with it. We gave our talks. There was many nations and NGOs that were there, non-governmental organizations. And I think 60 some odd Indian nation, UN nations. They're listening in the earpieces. It's beautiful. And then when I called, the suits took over. The lawyers, the educated Indian, all the colonized rabble. They took over and they started arguing about punctuation marks and capitalization of different words. I got the hell out of there. They made our statement. Sure enough, they come out with a Declaration of Indigenous Rights, the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Rights. Talk about a watered down version. Talk about allowing the invader states to continue their invasion and their genocide. That's really what it's all about. The continuation of the rape of indigenous people. The worst thing about it is when they colonize your own people to be the perpetuators of the genocide. Look at Africa. Look around the world. So, it's not a pretty sight. You go there and these people are giving scholarly papers. And I was somewhat disappointed at this scholarly exercise. Because not a lot, I take it back, a couple of the presenters had no emotion. But I'm not going to name names, but the lady who was responsible for the symposium, she gave a heartfelt talk. She didn't get to finish, but that was because of the constricts of time. At any rate, it wasn't what I expected. I hope there's more, but I was pleased with the overall, but it just wasn't what I expected. So, I do want you to know that there are learned indigenous people around the world who get together and present papers. And they asked me to go. And I was very honored. And I was very thrilled to give my presentation. But it was from the oral tradition, not a literate one. Doksha, okay.